Hello, people. If you're watching me, I'm Susan Graham, and it's not quite 2 o'clock, so I'm going to wait till it's 2 o'clock before I've got 2 minutes. And I'm going to let you know, I love doing what I do as an attorney, but I'm not a real good technical person. And the way this works is I have to have someone in my office to help me. So they got it started, but then from here on out, I have to push all the right buttons. So I'm just letting you know that. And I'm relying on oh my goodness, see, I didn't have my glasses on and it's 1:57. So we've got 3 minutes because I want to wait for everybody to come in at the same time so that they all have an opportunity to hear the whole thing. So, by the way, if you're interested, this is from a relative. I mean, I'm old, but this is from somebody's long gone. They bought this in Italy in the late 1800s, but unfortunately I didn't get the stories about how that is. It's inlaid mother of pearl and other things in that locket. There was no hair and there was no picture in that locket, so I don't have that interesting part of the story. But anyway, it pleases me to wear something from a dear relative who I enjoyed so much, and plus I was really happy to help her. I call her Cousin Kathy. She was my father's first cousin. And she had no children. It was my pleasure to help her. And at 90, she's full of the family stories. And at 90, she moved into a retirement home in Ohio. Oh gosh, she called me up one day and said, they're going to throw me out because I haven't paid my bills. So you tell them they're wrong, Susan. So I called and yeah, they said she hadn't paid the bills for a few months. She's been a business lady all her life. And when I called her, I said, Cousin Kathy, you just forgot. She said, I just can't do this anymore. You take over. So certainly it was my privilege to help her from age 90, where she was still on the ball mostly, and until 99, when she certainly didn't know anything. She was totally demented, which was sad. Anyway, pleases me to have her locket. So, my goodness. I don't know about you. My grandmother told me as I got older, time would go so fast. And that was when I was a little girl. And I thought, oh my God, I'm so bored. It was summertime and I was hanging out with my grandparents. Oh Lord, the days just dragged, even though it was summer. Now, every day I feel like I'm shot out of a cannon and then it's over. And then it all starts over again the next day, which is fine. Just it's a little overwhelming how quickly time goes, except for when you're watching the clock and then it goes slower. So what do I have? Okay. Waiting for the number 1 to turn to a number 2 and then I'll start. And by the way, I have no ability to edit this. So we're just doing the best we can. My goodness. Time just goes slow when you're looking at the clock. Just like when you're watching water boil. Okay, it's 2 o'clock, and I want to welcome you so much to the Beyond Retirement Learning Series. My name is Susan Graham, and I'm a certified elder law attorney. I practice here in Boise, Idaho, and I want to welcome you for spending your time with me this afternoon. In my office, we focus on seniors. We deal with people who retired or anticipating retired. We help other people, but that's our primary focus. And what we do is we help seniors create a safe and independent and financially secure life for right now and their future, and then actually for their families after they're gone. Today, we're going to talk about how to protect your spouse and your children after you die. Now, I want to talk to you about, just what we call an upfront contract in terms of how we're doing this. Not only do I appreciate you spending your time with me, but I want you to understand this will take an hour, something less than an hour. It won't be longer than that. If you have questions, I'm happy to address them. Put them in the chat section of your screen, and then I'll deal with those at the end. And please make those questions general. I can't answer specific things about your circumstances because that I don't have enough information to be really helpful. So just make them general questions. I'm happy to answer them. I understand your goal in listening to me is to get some education. And that's my goal, to provide you with information and education about the topic we're going to discuss. But I have a second goal, and that is for you to actually move forward with your own estate planning circumstances to accomplish your own personal goals. And hopefully you'll choose to set up an appointment with me, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. When this program is over, or when you sign off, there'll be a survey that pops up. And if you'd be nice enough to fill out that survey, this is if you can see it, you'll have it much more detail when it pops up. And if you miss it, it'll come up. You'll get an email automatically the next day. But that allows you to not only critique me, and I will tell you a little bit later on about how to get some free legal forms, but also if you want to visit with me, there's no charge for that first half hour. If we are in fact we have a potential for being a good fit for me being able to help you. I have to do my lawyer thing, which says this is truly an educational and not specific legal advice. As I mentioned, I'm doing the technology part, so please just be patient with me about that. Well, what brings you to listen to me today, to actually spend your time with me? And what happens is a lot of people are worried about the potential for a future crisis. Thankfully, nobody tells us when there's going to be a car wreck, or we have a stroke, or there's some major chaos that occurs in the family. But if that crisis occurs, then people don't really know what to do, and they're really worried about that. The other things people worry about as they get older is what happens if their health declines, or they have memory issues, or they run out of money. There's family conflict. Everybody's got a dysfunctional family. I can compete with the best of them. I mean, how do you deal with all that stuff? What if your documents really aren't in order? You did them a long time ago, or you never did them. And are they still effective? Are they still representative of what you want to have happen? Most people don't want to leave a mess. So that's why a lot of people come and talk to us so we can make their future better. The best thing about estate planning, at least what I enjoy, is I help clients really paint the picture of the future they want. I don't care if you're good at art or not. I mean, you get to decide, how do I want things to go? Well, the days are good. And how do I want things to happen the days that it's not going well? And I'm talking about the day there's an accident, there's a serious illness, there's memory issues, and then certainly the day somebody dies. So let's talk about the topic today, which is protecting your spouse and your children after you die. So if you're married and you die first, what are you most concerned about? What are you most worried about for your spouse and your children? And what if you're single or you're married and you die second? You're a widow or a widower. Same things. What's really on the top of your mind that you're concerned about? And then it becomes, how do you protect your children? How do you protect your children from themselves or other people? How do you make sure that their future is as good as you can help make that happen? And lastly, we're going to talk about how you maintain family harmony. So let's talk about the first one. What if you're married and you died first? What are you most worried about? Well, how's your spouse going to be able to manage? I mean, it could be you've been married for 30 years, 50 years, or only 5 years. It's a second marriage, or it's a first marriage. So how's your spouse going to manage if we take you out of the picture? And then most people want to make it easy for their spouse or their family when they are no longer there, especially if you've been the primary mover and shaker in the family in terms of taking care of the finances and making the major decisions and really controlling the finances, and your spouse doesn't really know too much about it. And what if your spouse has health issues? I have a lot of clients I have now, unfortunately, some clients who are blind or have macular degeneration and can't see, or can't see well enough to drive, can't see well enough to read documents, can't see well enough to even sign documents. I have clients who have hearing loss. Some of it's from being in the military and being next to those giant noise-making things like guns and cannons or airplanes. And then also I have clients who just as they age, they don't have good hearing. That interferes with their being able to live a full life and a safe life. And then, of course, there's memory issues. I had a lovely friend who called me up last year at lunchtime in the summer. I was at home making lunch and I got this phone call. And he's married to another woman, but he called me and said, Susan, I'm here in Boise and I don't know where I am. Would you come get me? So I said, Fred, would you go over to the nearest street corner and read the sign to me? And he read the sign to me. It was a part of town I had not been in before. And I said, I want you to grip that pole where the sign is and don't leave it. I'll be over in 10 or 15 minutes. And I quickly got my car and went over and got him. And I took him back home to his wife. And I said, why don't you call your wife? He said, well, I didn't want to tell her I was lost. So we stood around the backyard. She was out doing some yard work. And I said, you know, I'm happy to do this, but maybe you need to come up with some arrangement to make that safer for the both of you. And then, of course, it could be that your spouse really needs help with a lot of things, needs help with grocery shopping, really has trouble walking safely anymore. Is it safe for them to be in the home alone, or do they need somebody to come and help them out for a few hours each day? These are times for realistic conversations. And then if your spouse needs long-term care, and now, you know, you need somebody to come into the home for a few hours each day or to help with the bath aid, or after you're gone, because you're providing those services and that filter and that protection for your spouse. And I take you out of that picture, you, the healthy spouse, but you die first. How are you going to replace that? Is it safe for them to stay in their own home? And I'm not saying that the spouse is demented and can't participate in that conversation, but the two of you need to have that conversation to see, okay, if you fast forward 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, is it still safe to stay in the home? And if so, how do you make that happen? How do you make life full? Not just that you're sitting there isolated all by yourself or the spouse is isolated, but how do you make it a full life that's also safe and allows them the maximum protection? And then comes the issue of children, especially if it's a second marriage. If you, the married person, die first and it's a second marriage, and ultimately, when both you and your spouse are gone, you want your children to receive a portion of all these assets that you've worked so hard to amass during your lifetime. How do you make sure that that happens? Frequently, what happens is on the first death, everything goes to the other spouse. And then on the second death, you know, the surviving spouse is sitting on everything. And the children of the first one to die didn't really have a close relationship with the surviving spouse anyway, or they had a falling out. They were rude to that spouse. They weren't attentive to that spouse or whatever. And a few years, a little bit of time or a lot of time went by, and that surviving spouse changed the distribution. So instead, what was originally set up is it goes 50-50 to each family when the second death occurs. So the kids of the first marriage and of each of those spouses goes down to their own kids. So that half goes down to their own kids. But if the surviving spouse received everything, they own 100%. And then it becomes what I call whoever dies last wins. So that surviving spouse could say, I never did like those kids anyway of my first spouse today. I'm not giving them a dime. I'm giving it all to my own children. And those children are the first to die are disinherited. There are steps you can take to actually assure that those children receive a certain portion of the inheritance. And there are a variety of steps to do that. One is when the first spouse dies, they can say, yes, of my half, my surviving spouse gets access to that as he or she needs to maintain their lifestyle for the rest of their lives. But whatever's left of my half goes down to my children. The children are the first to die. And then the surviving spouse has her own or his own money, and they say, yeah, when I die, it goes to my kids. But you got to take some formal steps to do that. It just is not something that's automatic. And there are lots of variations of how that happens. I did one this week that the woman, it's a marriage and it's a second marriage, and the woman brought into that marriage, the wife brought into a home, and the husband didn't have a home, and the husband's living in the home. And so she said, okay, if I die first, my husband gets to stay in the house for the rest of his life. But when the husband dies or that house is sold, then the proceeds of that house, because it all belonged to the wife at the beginning, are going to go to her children, not to him and not to his children, because that's what they wanted. So there are lots of variations of that, but I'm saying you have to go through some formal steps to protect those children. There's another issue about if it's necessary to pay for long-term care for a surviving spouse. Then how do you do that? Where's the money coming from for that? And are you going to run through all the money for just that spouse? It's expensive. And once somebody passes age 65, the statistics are pretty grim. Depends on whose numbers you're looking at. But some people say you have a 50% chance. Other people say you have a 70% chance of needing care before you die. Now, care could be in your home, or assisted living, or independent living, or memory care facilities, or a skilled nursing care facility. Now, in your home, you pay a couple of dollars an hour. Usually it's these days around $25, $30 an hour for a bath aide or someone else to come in for a couple of hours each day or each week to help out. And if you want 24-hour care in your home, my God, that's breathtaking. That costs, you're looking at $12,000 to $18,000, $20,000 a month for 24-hour care. Then, you decide, I can't manage in this home anymore. It's too big. I don't want to deal with it. I'm a surviving spouse. So they then move to what's called independent living, which is basically a retirement home where you have an apartment or a cottage. And then there's also memory care places where somebody has some memory issues and there are people around to help them out. On assisted living, and that means you need some help with a few things, whether it's memory issues or taking your pills or getting dressed in the morning, that kind of thing. And those cost at a minimum $3,000, that's usually higher than that, to about $6,000 a month. And then if that's not adequate any longer, because that's where my cousin Kathy ended up. My cousin Kathy was my father's first cousin, and she had no children, so it was my privilege to help her out. And she sold her home when she was in her 70s and moved into independent living. It was a place that she had an apartment. And, they made the meals. She never was a good cook. She was absolutely ecstatic about whatever they made because she didn't have to cook it. And she made new friends there. And she lived there for a while. And then she had trouble walking around. So that was a progressive place. She moved into assisted living there. And she was so funny. She wanted to be queen. Honest to God, she wanted to be queen. So she just leaned on the button all day long and expecting somebody to appear and, entertain her. That didn't work very long. And she was obviously getting demented. And then she moved into skilled nursing care. And toward the end, I was paying $10,000 a month for her care. So that's what I'm talking about. How, if that should happen, we all want to live in our homes for the rest of our lives. There are a whole bunch of studies, 90% of us want to do that, but we have to be there safely. And of course, I myself want to go to bed one day and not get up the next morning, or be reading the newspaper and having a cup of coffee or drinking a glass of wine and just keel over. But again, we're not that fortunate. Normally it takes quite a bit longer. So if you're married and you die first, you need to have a conversation and you need to actually act on it. What do you do? What are you most worried about? And what can you do if on your worry list is, how is my spouse and how are my children going to be protected if something happens to you first? Again, it's easy to solve. And I say easy. Yeah, it's a lot of work, paperwork, and some other things that you need to do to coordinate your assets with your estate plan. and to make sure that you have all the pieces in place, the right agents, the right people to step up and replace you when you're not available to make decisions that you trust and that are going to do what you want. So let's talk about if you happen to be a single person, or you're a widower or a widow. What are you most worried about? Well, this is a slightly different version, because when you're living with someone, your spouse, somebody, and the reason you get married is because you like this person, and that continues for a lifetime as well as it's a business decision. But that's somebody that you're looking out for one another. But when that person isn't there, that creates some big problems. First of all, I tell my clients when they're single and they're older, I encourage them to have a safety net, a personal safety net. And by that, I mean, if you fall down, who's going to know? Doesn't mean you're demented or anything. You just trip over nothing. I have a sweet dog that I walk every day, and she's older. She's 12. And she trips over nothing, usually 1 or 2 times in our walk. And it's just because she's having trouble with her joints. I take her and we actually go to the chiropractor together. She gets an appointment, I get an appointment, and the chiropractor tunes her up and tunes me up once a month. But nonetheless, she still trips. Same thing for the rest of us. I mean, it doesn't mean you're in horrible shape. Things happen and you can fall down. I don't want you or anybody on the floor for a week or so until anybody notices, and hopefully you're still alive. So when I talk about being alone and living alone as a single person, widow, widower, never married, divorced, I don't care. Who's going to notice if that should happen or you're really ill? So I strongly encourage you to create a safety net. And by that, I mean talk. And when I say talk, it could be a text, it could be an email, could be, I don't care, however this thing works, call on the phone, but make that once a day. And at the same time of day and with the same one person. Don't expect the kids are somebody's checking in on you when you've got 3 kids and the other 2 think that somebody else is doing it. So, and that's pretty easy to do. You don't want to do that because you're so independent and you don't need it and you're just fine. I'm going to give you my father-in-law as an example. He, lovely man. Deep down inside, he was a lovely man. He was a sweet man. On the surface, he prided himself on being a grumpy old man. And by that, I mean, he truly was. He was grumpy. I would go over every Saturday afternoon. We'd have a whiskey, we'd chew the fat, and I'd go home. If I called him every day, he wouldn't answer the phone just to irritate him. And if I stopped by every day after work, that same thing. He didn't like that. So he only came over on Saturdays. He fell down on a Tuesday, and the cleaning ladies came on a Thursday. He was on the floor for 2 days. He ended up in intensive care for a month. Then he went to the Elks Rehab. Then he ended up in a skilled nursing care facility. Finally, after about 6 months, he got home. That was an extraordinary expense. And he never lived independently alone. He moved in with his daughter. So you can do a lot better than that. So that's why I'm saying, if you're single, please create your own safety net if you live alone. As I mentioned, 90% of us or so, depends on whose study you look at, want us to continue to live in our own home. And if that's true, then make it work. Be realistic. How do you make that work? I mean, I live alone, and I made myself, I made myself promise I would not get on a ladder. And a couple of years ago, it was the fall and the leaves were falling and they were all piled up in a drawer on my roof. And I looked at that and I thought, I've got to get up there and clean that off. So I schlepped this huge extension ladder from the garage. I extended it. I started climbing up that ladder and I got up to about the 4th rung. And this was a Saturday afternoon when nobody was home in the neighborhood. And I thought, have I lost my mind? And I climbed back down the ladder and lowered the ladder and lifted it up again and put it in the garage. And I called somebody on Monday. I mean, thank God I was at least that smart instead of going all the way up the ladder. I was a little stupid in the beginning. So if you're going to stay at home and live home safely, independently, is that going to work? And if it is going to work, how do you make that work? Do you need to remodel things? Do you need to change some of the lighting? That kind of thing. Or maybe you want to move closer to other friends. I have two college friends I talk to once a month. And when we were in college, all we did was laugh. I'm surprised we got out of college and didn't flunk out. I mean, we just had the best time. We just laughed all the time. And we were just joking the last month we spoke that, gee, maybe when we all get old, I don't know what we think is that particular date, that maybe we should all move into some retirement home and have adjoining apartments and just continue what we were doing in college and just laugh a lot. I don't care. I don't know that that's going to happen. But again, you need to look at, okay, you're doing fine today. Fast forward 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years. What's going to be the best living arrangement for you? What do you think is going to work out? And then you need to look carefully. If you need help, we all need help. I mean, yes, we are so independent. I can compete again with anybody else for being independent, but I know I need help at certain things, like somebody to get my leaves off my roof. So who do I want? Who do you want to help you if you become too ill to handle things? You're demented, like my cousin Kathy. You've had a serious accident or illness and you can't do it yourself. Who do you want to have do that for you? And who's going to handle? So that's 2 parts. When you can't do it for yourself and you're alive because of illness or dementia or an accident, who's going to talk to the doctor on your behalf to make the medical decisions that are appropriate for you? And who is going to help with your finances? Who's going to pay your bills and see that your money is handled appropriately and they don't leak town with your money? And you need an alternate. So whoever you come up with, the first person, you need a backup in case they're not available, in case they predecease you, or they're just too overwhelmed, or they don't want the job, or whatever. You can always change these papers anytime you want, but when I do planning with people, I'm always concerned that they don't change it. I've been doing this a long time, so I talked to somebody this week that the last time we did anything was 22 years ago, and they thought they'd call me up and say, "Oh, Susan, you think maybe we need to look at this again? Maybe the law has changed and our family has certainly changed." And it's just like, oh, what kind of rock have you been living under? Of course the world is changing. I mean, look at what the world is like right now. It's unimaginable. So that's why you need a backup. You can add it or change it later on, but in case you don't change it because you're too ill, you're demented, you can't do it, or it never crosses your mind, we need a backup to that first person. And if you have nobody in mind to handle your finances or no one in mind to handle your health decisions, that's useful information because there are professionals in this community and other communities who can do that for you. And they don't charge a dime. They might charge a few dollars in the beginning to get to know you. But after that, they really don't have any ongoing expenses until they actually take over and handle things because you're too ill to do that. Or you resign, like my cousin Kathy. She resigned, said, "I'm not handling my affairs anymore. You do it, Susan." So I took over. Or the day you die. So you need to figure out who's going to take care of your finances and your health decisions while you're alive and you can't do it. So those are some of the common worries of people who live alone, who are widowers or widows or single people. Okay, let's talk about how you protect your children when you're not there. Now, as I mentioned, most of the people we represent in my office are retired or anticipating retirement. So those are older people, 50s, 60s, 70s, and above. I even have some clients who are in their hundreds. But what if you're responsible? And I have clients who are actually responsible. I give them a fistful of gold stars when they're 30s and 40s and they come see me because they're concerned about the guardians for their children. If you don't say and you drop over dead, you and the mom and dad are no longer there, they die in a car accident, who's going to be the one to care for the children? And the persons you want don't have to be a family member, but most people focus on others who have similar values and morals, and a lifestyle that you think you want to be represented for your children for their future. Well, if you don't say anything, the judge figures out whoever might be the appropriate person. So you can do a lot better than that, and you can name a first person or a couple as guardians and an alternate. And that means somebody who's going to raise those kids until they're age 18. Now, our legal system says that when you reach the age of 18, you're a grown-up, which maybe was appropriate decades and decades ago, but it doesn't seem too likely these days. There are studies that some people have done that says young people don't really wake up until their late 20s. Wake up means pay the bills, don't bounce your checks, move out of the house, get a decent job, that kind of thing. And it doesn't mean they aren't trying in the meantime, but the nicest way to say is they don't have the life experience to know and make good decisions. I'm so sorry. Years ago, I saw a magnet that said, hire a teenager now while they know everything, which is absolutely true. It is such a wonderful place to be with it. You are so smart, you know everything, but we know they don't know everything and they can be stupid. So if you haven't made any plans about protecting your children, your young children, then what will happen the day they hit age 18? They will get whatever money they inherit. And they, again, don't have the life skills to know how to handle that appropriately. So usually what you want to do is make certain that that money is managed for them until they get to be a more mature age. Now, manage for them, you know, pay for sneakers, and they're in school, pay for the schooling expenses. If they have a new baby, they'll pay for daycare expenses. Another thing, they'll pay for insurance, they'll pay for car, pay for rent, whatever it is. But then you say the balance comes to them at their 30 or whatever age you see feels appropriate. The other thing you can do for your children is protect the inheritance for them, not only up until age 30, but even beyond. What I'm talking about is, look at the way the world works now. People don't have pensions. You know, you get Social Security finally when you get to whatever ages you are, and that depends on how much you've earned. But most people no longer have savings, or it's definitely a savings enough for retirement, and certainly don't have pensions. Unless you're working for a government agency or a very large corporation, almost nobody has a pension. So the inheritance your children receive from you is going to be the safety net for their future. So some of our clients are concerned about protecting the future for their children, and they actually take the inheritance that child is to receive from them, and they put it in what we call an asset protection trust. What that means is the money that the child inherits from you is protected from divorces, from lawsuits, from creditors, from bankruptcy, from them being stupid. You know, if they've got drug or alcohol problems, they're hanging out with the wrong people. I mean, there are all kinds of protections that can be built in that, so that there's still going to be money for them when they're 50, 60, 70 years old to help them get through their senior years. So, you know, again, this is something when we're talking about how do you protect these people, a spouse or a child or your children or other people you're concerned about, you have to sit down and be realistic. What are you worried about? And once you identify that, there are steps that can be taken to actually assure that that worry is solved or corrected or reduced dramatically in size. But you have to take formal written steps to make that happen. Another concern about your children is what happens if you die, again, and you give that to your spouse or someone else, and then when that second person dies, finally then the children get an inheritance. You don't want them to be disinherited. So how do we protect against that? It is not uncommon. Again, we do planning for people, which is certainly a joy, but we also deal with when everything goes wrong because somebody becomes incompetent or not able to handle things and they're still alive. And then also what happens when that individual dies. And it's not uncommon when someone dies, especially in a married couple, that the children of the first one to die approach the widow or widower at the funeral and are atrocious. They ask for jewelry, they ask for money at the funeral or shortly thereafter, or even before the funeral. I've even had children of one of the spouses that was dying while she was in the hospital. This was a second marriage, and her husband was there tending to her. Her children went to the older couple's home and stole all the jewelry that belonged to their mother. And if you don't think the father, the husband, was unhappy about that, you're wrong. I mean, he came to me like 10 days after she died and changed the whole estate plan so those children received nothing. Well, that's his money, you know. She said, "All goes to you," and he decided what he wanted to do. And I'm not saying that's inappropriate or appropriate. I'm just saying these are just people and emotions. So if you're concerned about your children being disinherited by the surviving spouse, there are steps you need to take to make sure that doesn't happen. How do you maintain family harmony? Oh boy, even in the good days, sometimes that's a test. But I will tell you that the best way to do that, especially when you're gone, or you should, heaven forbid, become incapacitated, is to have a written plan. A written plan that's done in the good days, that, you know, and it makes sense to you. I don't care if it makes sense to anybody else, but it makes sense to you, because that's enforceable if you do that right. Because then it says, if they're mad at you, and let's say you're dead. So you say, you have 3 children, and one of them is very successful, and the other 2 really need the money. You can say that to the successful child, I give you $100 or nothing, because you've been so successful and you don't really need the money, and the rest goes to the other 2 kids. And that's fine. You can say that. And at least if anybody's mad, they're going to be mad at you because you're the dead person. But a good chance it'll destroy or really harm the relationship of those siblings. When someone dies, an estate plan is usually, you know, the distribution of the assets is usually perceived as a scorecard by the ones who inherit, the children, of the love and appreciation of each of those children. So oftentimes a successful child feels insulted. They worked hard, they did all the steps they had to do to be as successful as they are, and they may feel they're being punished for being successful. I'm not saying anything's right or wrong, but I am saying recognize when you do an estate plan, this truly is a reflection about how your children are perceived by you. So if you do an unequal distribution, as I just described, you might want to write a letter separate from your estate plan, just an informal letter to your children that says, this is why I did what I did, to try to reduce the pain, or at least give them an understanding about why you came up with those conclusions. Other things that are important when you're gone is what I call the stuff in your house. Those are the untitled assets. Who gets the ring? Who gets the painting? Who gets the gun? Who gets the china? Those types of things. Now, the law allows you to write a list like that, and you can change that list anytime you want. You don't need a lawyer to do that. It doesn't need to be notarized or witnessed. But the advantage of doing that is, again, if they're mad because they didn't get something like the wedding ring or the engagement ring. I mean, there's only one of them. You got 3 kids. Again, if they're mad at somebody, they're mad at you. You're dead. It really reduces the friction among the children. There was one Supreme Court decision that was amazing to me. It was a family up in Grangeville, and they argued about a meat platter. And that went to the Idaho Supreme Court as to who was going to get this meat platter. And then there was a decision made, and somebody wasn't happy. So it went back to the Idaho Supreme Court a second time about this meat platter. Now, I never did know. All I did is read these decisions, but I'm convinced that that must have been a meat platter that was made out of silver or pewter or some kind of metal, because there's no way that it was, you know, a porcelain meat platter that wasn't smashed someplace along the way. The cost of going to the Idaho Supreme Court once, as well as twice, is covered. I mean, that could have been gold meat platter. I mean, they're really expensive doing that. But obviously, there was such unhappiness in this family about who ended up with it. They ended up fighting about this in the Supreme Court. So that's what I'm saying. If there are important items in that you want to be sure go to the right person, you need to put that on that list. What about the cabin, the family cabin? I've got a lot of clients who have the family cabin up in McCall or other places in the state of Idaho that were built. And that cabin was built by grandma or grandpa. And when they died, they gave it to their two kids. And those two kids still got along pretty well. And then one of those two children died. And now we've got the children of the deceased sibling who now own, so it was a brother and sister, and the sister died. And so the uncle is half owner. The children of the deceased sister, her three kids, are half owner. How is this all going to work? You can see as we go down to lower and lower generations, it falls apart. Now, when grandma and grandpa were alive, everybody got along. And even the brother and sister miraculously got along. But if the grandchildren live out of state, or they don't want to pay the expenses, or whenever they go to the cabin, they never talk to a soul and just show up and they're slobs, or they bring their friends and they have beer parties, and the other family members don't like that, that just becomes a nightmare. They don't want to pay the expenses, they don't pay the taxes, they don't pay the maintenance. You know, how do you resolve those issues? Those are real difficult. And that's something, again, if you identify that as a problem, you know, how to maintain the family harmony when you say, I've got this cabin and I want it I want to stay in the family forever. Well, how are we really going to make that happen? And is that practical? And there are ways to make that happen, and there are ways to make that practical, but you actually have to have a written plan that covers those issues. And then what if you want to make a specific distribution? I have a lot of clients who are helping their children out. So they have a rental, which, by the way, the child is living in, and the child makes modest payments as rental payments, if they're even making rental payments. But when the parents die, they want as that child's share of the estate to include that residence. Again, we have to have that in writing to make that actually happen and make it fair to everybody. So there's no dispute. So we're not, people's noses aren't really bent out of shape because mom and dad really preferred you and see they made your life easier. And, you know, well, yeah, maybe, and maybe not, but maybe they just want to be certain that that child continues to live in that home because that's what the parents wanted. Then we have to look at, what if somebody dies first? I mean, we all think the perfect world is, you know, the old people are going to die and the young people are going to be around and so forth. And it doesn't work like that. Look at the obituaries. We got people who are 18, we got people who are 12, we got people who are 99 who are dying. It's all over the place. So you need to address in your estate plan, if somebody dies first, who gets that share? Does it go to their spouse, their kids? Does it go back into the pot? If it goes down to little people, is it going to be managed for them till later? That kind of stuff. And then, again, talking about family harmony, especially with second marriages, who's going to handle everything? Who's going to wind it all up? So if it's a second marriage and the husband has 2 kids and the wife has 3 kids, and the husband's child, oldest child, is a CPA, and the wife's child, oldest child, is a trust officer at one of the local banks. Both capable, responsible, financially knowledgeable people, probably will do a good job. I don't care. If you choose one of them, the ones from the other family, I don't care if that child who's elected, the trust officer or the CPA, the other ones are going to complain. It's a guarantee. You know, and I don't care how much full disclosure. I mean, that's just the way things work. And if you put the 2 of them together, that requires 2 signatures for everything. It just creates friction between these families. So I'm a huge fan, and it's not always perfect, but you may want to think about an independent fiduciary, an independent person. Oftentimes it would be a bank trust department, but it could be other people who actually handle everything and wind it up so that the families aren't butting heads. If they're mad at anybody, they're mad at this neutral person who is going to be doing a good job because you selected the right person. But it at least gives the ability to maintain family or harmony in the family, and certainly between these 2 families. So how do you make your decisions reality? You've got to do something. First of all, you've got to identify what it is you're concerned about. What are the pitfalls that you can see that could occur when you're not able to handle things anymore, when you mentally or physically you're not capable of making appropriate decisions and helping out, or the day you're dead, the day you're gone? How can you make certain that things are going to be the way you would like them to be? Well, that means you have to write it down. Just orally saying it is totally unenforceable. Absolutely has zero enforcement. I had one family where mom and dad died, and there were lots of things in the house, and they were fighting about who gets this and that. And the family brought to me a video and wanted to show me the video where dad was standing in front of this and saying, this TV goes to Sam, and then stood in front of the dining room set, and then said, this goes to Jane. And, you know, I tell them I'm not watching this video because it's garbage. Maybe history and interesting to the family, but it's totally unenforceable as a legal document, as a legal statement that makes anything happen. So you've got to do it the right way. And by that, I mean, it has to be written down. And you can do that with the last will and testament. You can do it with revocable trust. There are other methods you could do that, but it has to be formal and written. But in those documents, you get to decide who's going to be in charge and who's a backup. You also get to decide who's going to inherit and what if they predecease you. You get to decide if there's going to be strings on the money for somebody who's inheriting from you. You know, is this a young person that we want to be sure it's managed for them until they're at least 30? Or is this somebody who's in a terrible marriage that you never want them to get their hands on the money because you know the spouse is going to take it from them? If you do nothing, which is a perfectly legitimate estate plan, and most people chose that route, the state of Idaho will decide it. But one of the things the Idaho law says is young people get the money the day they're 18. That's crazy because they just don't know how to handle the funds. One of my young people, I didn't get a hold of him until about 6 months or a year after he inherited the money. He was, I think he was 20, and he got a couple of $100,000, and he really researched and tried to figure out what to do with this long before he ever talked to me. He bought a chicken farm. Now, I don't know anything about chicken farms. If I really needed to, I don't know, but I know people I could talk to could find out about chicken farm. But that is certainly an inappropriate investment if that's the only money you've got. And he lost it all. Then he came to me after he lost the money. So that's why I'm saying, you don't want the Idaho law to decide. You need to take the initiative and looking at your own circumstances and decide how that's going to be happening. So why don't people create their own story? Why don't people actually do this? Take the time to figure out what they're concerned about and then take the additional steps to make something happen in a formal manner that's enforceable should they become ill or the day they die. Well, it's because they're worried about it costs too much and they like to procrastinate. So let's talk about cost. I looked yesterday at what costs for a vacation for two in Hawaii for 1 week. So, so you flying over to Hawaii is a fairly long flight. So I got some business class tickets and stayed at a nice resort. I mean, my God, you're going to go to Hawaii for a super duper vacation. You might as well stay at a nice place. So it was a Marriott hotel. It cost for the two of them just around $13,000. Now, the food was extra. Okay, but a lovely place, so you have a really comfortable airline flight there and back, and you stay at a lovely resort, and the swimming pool, and sleeping in the ocean, the music, the great accommodations, and so forth. But, that's certainly a significant fee, pay $13,000, and then you pay for food and the other things on top. Now, when you're done with that, what you do is you have wonderful memories. And the time I've been in Hawaii, what I like the best is the air. It's so moist and so warm. It just feels so good. It's like somebody hugging you. So they've got the memories and they've got pictures. So what does it cost when you do estate planning? We don't just have people just end up with pictures. You actually get something that is more permanent and certainly gives you peace of mind. Because it covers, if heaven forbid you should become disabled, as well as when you're gone, how do things get handled. And so in our office, when you set up a complete estate plan that deals with all of the issues that we've talked about and many other things, in protecting your spouse, your kids, making it as easy as possible when you're gone and so forth, our fees usually range between $3,000 and $10,000. Sometimes they're slightly less, sometimes they're slightly more, but that's a pretty common range. By the way, if you're not aware of it, 1 month in skilled nursing care costs $10,000 on average. So, yeah, they cost money, but you get what you pay for. And it gives you the peace of mind that when you need it, you've got it there. It's already set there. It's impossible to do this should you become incompetent. You don't have the ability to come up with a contract that you can sign that is enforceable. And the day you die, if you have nothing in place, again, the Idaho legislature decides that for you. So let me now look at some questions, and then I'll answer those. But let me mention in the meantime, before I pull up the questions, I have some homework for you. Really simple homework. It only takes 2 minutes. You don't have to do it right now, but you could do it after we finish. I encourage you to take 2 minutes and write down 3 steps that you can take to accomplish your own personal planning goals. 3 steps. Now, that's not hard. Doesn't have to be a long sentence. It could be 1 or 2 words. The advantage of doing that is there are more studies that have been done. Boy, there are a lot of people doing studies all the time, but these things really work. They say if you write it down, you've increased your chance of that actually being accomplished to like 60, 70%. So I encourage you again to write down 3 steps you can take to accomplish your personal planning goals for your future. So let me look at these questions. So let me move this. We have a blended family and everybody doesn't get along. So how do I protect my spouse when I die? Well, this is what we talked about before. You've got to do something in writing. If you write in your estate planning documents, if I die first, this is what I want to have happen to my property. And, and I'm making this up because there are a lot of variations. I want my spouse to be able to stay in the house for as long as he or she wants. And the bills for that house are going to be paid by my surviving spouse or paid for out of my money, me, the spouse who dies first. And then when the spouse dies or the house is sold, then that house goes to my kids, the kids are the first to die. That's one of many things you can do. But if you don't do that, you have created great chaos, because then we open up the Idaho code and that just becomes an absolute mess, especially on a second marriage, because there's 2 kinds of property when people are married. There's separate property and community property. Idaho is a community property state. And in Idaho, the law presumes no matter how the asset is titled, it belongs to the both of you when you're married, unless you have a marriage contract that says differently. And then there's separate property. Separate property is something you owned before the marriage, or you received, that individual just received as a gift or an inheritance just to them during the term of the marriage. That's separate property. And when you die, if you have nothing in place, all of the community property goes to the surviving spouse. And remember, the presumption is it's all community property. And 1/2 of the separate property goes to the communities, to the surviving spouse. And the other half goes to the kids that are the first to die. But Idaho has another little twist about the separate property. In Idaho, income generated from separate property is community property. So you have a fishbowl. You have all white marbles in the fishbowl. That's separate property. And as the years go by in the marriage, black marbles showing up in the fishbowl with the white marbles. The black marbles are community property. That's interest income on the savings account that was separate property. That's dividend income from an investment. That's rental income from an apartment that was separate property. And then when you're dead, how many, and you have no plan in place, how many black marbles and how many white marbles are in this fishbowl? It becomes just a bloodbath. All you do is give lots of money to the CPAs and attorneys. So it's critical especially on a second marriage, but for everybody to have an estate plan in place to solve those problems. So let me see the next one. I'm single and I don't have kids. How do I get help when I'm too ill to take care of myself? You know, that's a big problem. You know, again, we all want to just die one day, but it doesn't work like that. So you need to make some plans ahead of time. You can decide who's going to handle things. And then they're set to take over. Now, you could be like my cousin Kathy, as time went by and you just couldn't handle it anymore. You can actually reach out and flip a switch, you know, say you need to take over right now. But you can put in the documents when they take over, so that they're there. And we have clients who use professionals for making their health decisions, not family members, not friends. And their doctor knows who those professionals are. So if they show up in the emergency room or in the hospital, and as soon as those professionals are notified, they show up there. They're available 24 hours a day, every day of the year. So again, you need to make some decisions about who's going to do that. And if you don't have anybody, that's useful information, but there are people and companies who will do that. They're professionals in this community and in every community. So that's another reason to certainly put that kind of plan in place. Let me look at one more. What do I do if I don't have friends or family close to me who can help me with my health and financial things? Again, that's similar to the answer I just gave. You know, you may have friends that you talk to or family that you talk to that are across the country, and you talk to them. I have clients who are talk to friends and family who every day, and they're truly on the East Coast or on the West Coast, you know, and that's fine. And they're still okay. You can use them as your agents because this is the times we live in. I mean, we've got Zoom like we're using right now. We've got Skype, we've got emails, we've got, you know, our phones, all this sort of stuff. So it doesn't mean that they have to be right in the same town or in the same neighborhood that you live in for them to be able to step up and help you. But again, you need to identify who it is you're relying on and certainly let them know so that they know to step up and to keep in close contact with you, or in the alternative, to use professionals who can help you with those circumstances. Well, I'm going to stop now, but let me tell you and wind this up. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is fill out this survey. Because what will happen at the end of this meeting, don't sign out right away and this survey will pop up. And if you miss it, again, it'll come in the email to you tomorrow. But the reason it's helpful for me and also for you, if you fill out that survey, is there are a couple of things. First of all, you can schedule an appointment with me if that's something that you'd like to do. It is certainly my joy and pleasure to help families create the future that they want. And just indicate that on that form, and then someone from my office will contact you, ask a few questions to see if we are a potential good fit to go forward to help you out. If so, there's no charge for the first half hour of that meeting, and that's basically a $225 value. And we'll see in that consultation what's the next best step for you. In addition, I have free forms on that on my website. And if you go to the resources button on my website and go down to information, forms and information, you'll find a variety of forms that you can fill out on your own. Financial powers of attorney, health powers of attorney, end-of-life decisions, those kinds of things. Lastly, if you'd be nice enough to critique me, I'd appreciate that, or suggest future topics for me to address. I would be pleased to have that information. I enjoy sharing this information with people, and from comments from people like you, I get to continue to improve. So I would really appreciate if you'd fill out that survey. Now, the next time I do one of these Beyond Retirement Learning Series will be December 15th at 2 o'clock. It's a Thursday. And at that time, I'm going to talk about giving a priceless gift to your children. to protect their inheritances from predators. So again, please fill out that survey and return that to us. And I greatly appreciate you spending your time with me this afternoon. Thank you so much for doing that. Goodbye.